This is kind of crazy. The regular season is not over yet. Still 2 games left to play for Pitt, and yet we are less than 2 weeks away from signing day. Do you remember when it would be like, approaching game 11 of the regular season and you'd still be, 2.5 months away from signing day or 2 months away from signing day? Well, now you're 2 weeks away from signing day. Less than 2 weeks. Actually, it's 2 weeks from yesterday will be signing day. It's December 4th or 5th or something like that. It's that first Wednesday of December is signing day this year. They keep pushing it back. It was February, then it was the first Wednesday in February, then it was like the third Wednesday in December and the first Wednesday in February, although that got a lot less attention. Now it's the first Wednesday in December. It's happening fast. It's coming up quick. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for why it got moved. We can talk about that another time. What's relevant today is the state of Pitt's 2025 recruiting class. They lost a guy yesterday. It was a big one of the top-rated guys in the class. Still pretty good group, though, and I still think there's a lot to like. Let's talk a little recruiting here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, we're going to touch on recruits a little bit. We were going to talk about that anyway today, but then the news came yesterday, and we actually talked about it earlier in the day on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, something I think people have been anticipating for a little while, but we did talk about it on the message boards earlier in the day yesterday, so you might have seen it coming even more. Pitt lost a recruit, 4-star defensive back, probably a corner, Elijah Dotson out of Michigan. Had been committed to Pitt since the summer. He was one of those June official visits who committed, and he flipped to Michigan yesterday. This was sort of on the radar for a little bit. Once Michigan became interested and seriously pursued Dotson, it was clearly going to be a real challenge for Pitt to hold on to him, a Michigan kid, a kid in the state of Michigan. When Michigan comes calling, it becomes very tough to turn down the Wolverines, right? The Blue and Maize, as they might say. And then that's what ultimately happened. I wasn't sure when it would happen that Dotson would flip, but Elijah Dotson did flip to Michigan yesterday, and that took one recruit off of Pitt's commitment list. Panthers are down to 21 players in the 2025 recruiting class. If you look on Rivals, I think we list 21 or 22, but we have to get that cleaned up a little bit. Overall, the class ranks inside the top 40 nationally. Probably around the range where they're going to finish, between 35 to 45, depending on how things shake out with their class and other classes. I think it's probably right around where you'll see them on signing day in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, 13 days from today, 2 weeks from yesterday. But I still think it's a really good class. I think it's got some pieces you really like. And it's interesting, and we'll break this down more here over this this episode of the Morning Pitt. It's interesting because numbers wise, in terms of the entire class, it's the balance is it's weighted toward the offense. They have more offensive recruits than defensive recruits, but the talent is pretty heavy on the defense. And I think there's good offensive players to like, but the talent is pretty heavy on the defense. And I think it's interesting to see how that, a lot of times in the past we've seen Pitt take more defensive guys, particularly defensive backs, and they have a big defensive back class here. But we sometimes the numbers tend to favor the defense, and the talent favors the defense as well. But this year, at least you've got quantity on offense and quality on defense, and I think there's a decent amount of quality on offense as well. So we'll break down the class and kind of where Pitt stands. Listen, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to get the most comprehensive source. The comprehensive source thing is for the website. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is where we put all of our Pitt videos. I go on autopilot sometimes during that. I got to find new ways to say it because you guys probably tune out as well when I start saying it. But I just sort of drift, it's like my mind starts thinking about what the next thing I want to talk about is, so I feel like I can just sort of regurgitate those taglines for the YouTube site and for the website, and then I get it mixed up like I just did. But youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is where we have all of our Pitt video content. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live stream like we did last night. Me and Jim Hammett get together with you for an hour to talk Pitt sports every Wednesday night, and then we go live after the games for the post-game show. We'll be live after Pitt Louisville this Saturday. And we'll have a live conversation with you. We'll have some drinks. We'll talk Pitt football, and we'll see what we think about the state of things after Pitt plays at Louisville. I think Pitt's going to win that game, actually. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow in the mailbag. I know I'll definitely write about it in the morning, or the 3-2-1 column tomorrow morning. We have stuff all over the place. We have all our stuff here at YouTube. We have everything on the Panther-Lair.com. I mean, there's just lots of Pitt coverage, as much Pitt coverage as you could possibly want. And and I think the best Pitt coverage that you're going to find. And if you're looking for the best Pitt shirts and gear that you can find, the place to do it is at homefieldapparel.com. Homefieldapparel.com has just outstanding Pitt stuff. I mean, their Pitt stuff is really second to none. Their logos, the graphics, the designs, the inspiration, it's just, some of it is downright perfect. It's all instantly recognizable as Pitt. It's not tied to any one specific era. It's just Pitt, and it looks great. And they put it on the highest quality T-shirts and sweatshirts and all those kinds of things. So it looks great. It's on great material. It feels great. It fits great. And best of all, we'll give it to you for 15% off. Use your promo code PIT24 on your first order and get 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. Go check it out right now. So like I said, Pitt still got a top 40 recruiting class with the prospects they brought in. I guess we could start right there, because it's often a point of contention. Well, if you recruit in the top 40s, that's where you're going to end up. You're going to be a top 40 team, which obviously would mean unranked. It's probably around the range of an 8-4 team, which that sort of tracks with what Pitt is on course for this season, or at least what we thought they would be before the season. That's a whole other conversation to get into, which maybe I'll write about in the 3-2-1 column tomorrow. There's something to be said for, generally, if your recruiting rankings average 40 to 50, if you're in the 40s over every 4-year cycle or 5-year cycle, that's your average finishing position in recruiting rankings, chances are pretty good that you're probably going to be in that range. I think with Pitt, what we've seen, there's fluctuations in how the team finishes. But what we've seen with Pitt, I think, while they have generally recruited in that range of the 40s, I think we have more often than not seen this staff coach the team into something higher than that. A team that finishes in the 30s and on occasion in the 20s. We've seen back-to-back years where they finished ranked in 2021 and 22, and depending on how they finish out this season, there's a chance they could climb in there as well. Now, that's not just to say, boy, they're just great coaches. They're able to coach up inferior talent. They're able to pull the diamonds out of the rough and coach them up. There's some element to that, but I think what this staff has shown a propensity for doing more often than not, and I would say particularly on defense, is finding the guys who fit the system really well. Finding those players who have the skill set and the understanding of the game and desire and all that stuff that really fit the way Pitt wants to play. And then getting the right guys, being right in your evaluations and then doing a good job in development so you end up with players who really excel. So, I mean, you end up looking at, recruiting classes that are full of Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett and, Dane Jackson or Marquez Williams or A.J. Woods or Javon McIntyre or Servassier Dennis or Kalijah Cansey, list on and on. I mean, you just focus on defensive guys, but you could go over to offense. You could look at, Jordan Addison was a 3-star guy. Izzy Abanikanda was a 3-star guy. Branson Taylor was a 3-star guy. Kenny Pickett was a 3-star guy. All recruits that I think in theory will, if you sign all of those recruits, classes full of those guys, it's going to put you in the 35 to 50 range and occasionally 40 to 55 range. You're going to be in the 40s on average, probably. But because those players, particularly on defense, were such a good fit for the scheme, and the coaches did a good job evaluating and identifying and then developing, they were able to achieve at a higher level than maybe what their recruiting rankings would have indicated. And the best example is not the best example. I'd have to think about who I think the best example is, but a really good example. Servassier Dennis might be the best example of a 2-star guy who ended up being, obviously a very good player. But maybe the second best example, who might actually end up being a better example than Dennis, and a guy who's helping and contributing and leading right now, is Kyle Lewis. Kyle Lewis was the Temple commit. A guy playing a bunch of positions in New Jersey, a 3-star guy. He was committed to Temple. Pitt flipped him from Temple, and he is now, I think, a surefire first-team All-ACC player. Should be the front runner for the ACC Defensive Player of the Year award, and I think should get serious All-America consideration, and actually should get All-America honors. He should be a consensus All-American at the very least, because there's no one else right now producing at the level Kyle Lewis is producing. Nobody else in the country has, no other players in the country have at least 80 tackles, 14 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks, and 4 interceptions. Nobody. No other player is achieving at that level. And got a little Kyle Lewis on the brain. I was tweeting about it yesterday. I'm writing about it for the 321 column. I'm writing an article about it for today about Lewis. And so, that's why I'm able to rattle these numbers off. But I mean, this guy is legitimately playing like an All-American, and he was a 3-star recruit who was committed to Temple. Now, I don't know if anybody was all that excited when Pitt flipped him from Temple. I think, I think, oh, good. Looks like they got another good athletic linebacker, but it's not like anybody was doing backflips over it. Nobody said, oh, I think they just signed an All-American. Well, they did. And because they identified him as a good fit for the defense, and they've been able to coach him up and get him there. So we could spend the whole episode. I almost did this whole episode about Kyle Lewis, but then Elijah Dotson decommitted yesterday, and it made it easier to talk about recruiting. But so when we look at this class, if this class ends up settling in the 35 to 45 range, sort of typically where Pitt's classes have landed under Pat Narduzzi, well, I think we can look at it and say, okay, that's pretty standard. Let's see if they got the right guys for it. And to some extent, there is an offense-defense separation here, because I think it's an easier sell that they got the right guys when you look at the defensive prospects. And it's a much tougher sell when you look at the offensive side of the ball. And so let's just start on offense. All right. They have 12 recruits committed on the offensive side. And actually, we could break this down a little bit more. We already broke it down to offense versus defense. We could even get more specific and break it down as O-line versus skill and big skill, because the offensive line is the biggest question mark. I don't think they've done a bad job recruiting skill players over the years, although right now they're in a spot where they have all of their top receivers except for Kenny Johnson are transfers, and they've had to do that because of how they've recruited receivers in recent years. But I think when you look at this year's group of skill guys, Bryce Yates and Ja'Karian Turner and Demarion Folks and Khalil Sterling, Tony Kinsler and Saquon Smith, the 4 running backs and receivers, and I think there's a couple guys who are definitely receivers, a couple who are definitely running backs, and some guys who could kind of swing between both. I think there's some really exciting highlight films out there of those guys, and I think we can give Cade Bell and his group the benefit of the doubt on those positions, because it seems like they've done well in the past with getting guys. I mean, obviously Desmond Reed can translate at this level, and I think also just these look like really good prospects. With Yates, Turner, Folks, Sterling, Kinsler, and Smith. I think Mason Heinschel, the quarterback, looks like he is going to be really, really good. I think he has a lot of potential. He's had a great senior season. I think he's going to be pretty good. Max Hunt is an interesting guy as a tight end, a big tight end, 6'5", 200 and some pounds out of Tampa, Florida. I think he's got a lot of potential. The question mark is the offensive line. And I think that's been the question mark in recruiting for a while. I think a lot of the situations they find themselves in with regards to offensive success on the field can be tied back to offensive line recruiting. You can look at this year where they've had to mix and match the way they have, and injuries are always going to be a factor. And look, the reality is I think for most schools, it's going to be hard if you lose 1 or 2 starters. It's going to be hard to put, championship caliber players out there. But I think the way Pitt has recruited the offensive line, it's even more of a challenge. It's even more of an issue. And so that side needs to step up. I think Shep Turk from Thomas Jefferson looks like he could be a beast out there. But, Akram El Nagmi from England and Torian Chester from Georgia and Jordan Fields from Houston, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. It sort of feels similar to what we've seen in the past with Pitt's offensive line recruiting. If anything, these guys seem like a trend toward bigger offensive linemen, where I thought they might be trying to go smaller, might be trying to, get quicker guys, more athletic guys. They seem to be going for bigger prospects, at least in this class. We'll see what they do going forward. But, that's such an important position. They've got to get that right, just because they haven't really gotten it right for a few years, without the exception of like a hit here and there. I think Ryan Baer is still going to be pretty good. I think Caleb Holmes, the true freshman, is going to be pretty good. BJ Williams obviously looks like he's got a bright future. But like hitting on one guy per class probably isn't going to cut it. And that sort of feels like their current hit rate. That's an exaggeration to say that's their current hit rate, but it feels like it. Defensively, I think this class looks really good. I think you start with the secondary. It looks like another really good secondary class that could be, at least in terms of guys coming in as recruits, could be one of the better secondary classes that they've signed. I mean, Josh Gurrier and Cole Woodson as safeties, Mason Alexander, a 4-star prospect, and Sean Lee as corners. Like, those guys are really good. They're fast, they're athletic. And again, this Pitt staff has a knack for finding players who fit. You know, finding players who fit, particularly on defense, and especially in the defense, in the secondary, in the defensive backfield. I think we can extend that out to linebacker too, with the last couple of recruiting classes where I think this staff has really honed in on a certain type of player, probably going back to 2020 even. You could go quite a ways back. I think you could go back to there to look at like Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields and set aside what those guys became. I think if you look at how they profiled as recruits and as prospects, they were the same type of player and they fit the mold of what they've been trying to get with, you know, basically everybody since then. Marquand Pope in the 2022 recruiting class, he was a safety in high school. You know, last year's group that came in, Rasheem Biles and Lewis came in 2022 with Pope. And Lewis was one of those guys who he might have played more linebacker, but he definitely could have been a safety in high school at a team with more depth at linebacker. And you go to last year's group with Rasheem Biles and Braylon Lovelace and Jordan Bass. I mean, Biles and Bass were safeties. Lovelace would have been a safety if, again, Leachburg didn't need him to be the guy and go out and, you know, be in the middle of the defense to go out to make all the plays. But they're similar types of players in that they're big athletes, and I shouldn't even say big. They're athletic, explosive players, and I think you're seeing the results this year. You see how well the linebackers have played. You see how good Lewis has been, how good Biles has been, how good Lovelace has been. That's the next wave of Pitt linebackers, and that's the next that's the mold of Pitt's next wave of linebackers. That's the kind of guy they're trying to bring in, and so I think we've given the staff the benefit of the doubt with defensive backs for a few years now because they've been really good at identifying it. And I think we're getting to that point with linebackers. So we look at, you know, Emmanuel Taylor, who's still listed in the Rivals database as a wide receiver, which speaks to his athleticism. Jordan Bass also was a wide receiver in high school. But you look at Manny Taylor and you look at Justin Thompson, you see them, you know, I think you could say, well, they've gotten pretty good at identifying linebackers who fit the scheme. I'm gonna trust that they found the right guys again because they've gotten pretty good at it. Ryan Manilak, I think, and this staff have done well. And then up front, they've got 2 defensive ends and 1 defensive tackle committed. If you look at the Rivals database, you'll see that Trevor Summers is listed as a defensive end. He's a defensive tackle. You look at Julian Anderson, I think he's listed as an athlete. He's going to be a defensive end. And you look at Denham Cook, he's listed as a linebacker. He's going to be a defensive end. So not a lot of good reference tools there, but we'll always keep you straight on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Look, the other big element, of course, and we'll talk about this more over the next week, I'm sure, is the transfer portal. Because it's not just about this 2025 recruiting class. These aren't the only guys that are going to be added to the roster next season. There's the portal as well. And I think there's no question about what the biggest priorities in the portal are and have to be. It's the offensive line and it's defensive end. And if you can find this guy or that guy who can help you out, you find a good receiver that sort of fits well or a good this or a good that, great. But you need to get offensive linemen and you need to get a defensive end, at least one. Because I'm not sure how good this year's group really is. And while I think there's some talent in the youth, you need more. And you need some experienced guys to come in and really lead and create an impact off the edge. I know we're saying this after Pitt had like 5 sacks against Clemson or something like that, but you need more. You need more off the edge. You need impact pass rushers. And I think the portal is the best way to get it. Now, the toughest part is that really good impact pass rushers are going to cost. And really good offensive linemen are going to cost. But Pitt has to probably shop above, you know, the level of Nate Matlack, Chief Borders. No disrespect to those guys, but you're going to have to do better than that next year in the portal at defensive end, and you're going to have to do better than Lyndon Cooper next year in the portal on the offensive line. You've got to upgrade those positions, and a very unique opportunity to do so exists with the transfer portal. Pitt's going to have to do it. They've got a chance to have a pretty good team next year, I think. I really do. If they bring back the right guys, and that'll always be, as we talk about adding players, you also run into the problem of attrition and potentially losing players to the portal. But if they bring in the right guys, I think they have a chance. If they bring back the right guys, I think they have a chance to be pretty good with 1 or 2, maybe 3 key additions. Again, along the offensive line and at defensive end. But first things first, they got to get the recruiting class signed. That's the first Wednesday after the end of the regular season is signing day. So we're counting it down. It's less than 2 weeks. Stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com to get all the coverage of Pitt recruiting so you know what to watch for as signing day approaches. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Still have time to get questions in for this week's mailbags. You go to the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Rivals or at Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and you can submit your question for tomorrow's mailbag episode of the Morning Pitt. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe. I hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Thursday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.